Oh my God. I thank God every day that I transitioned 20 years ago because the system I transitioned under has nothing to do with the lunatic fringe politics that have hijacked the trans movement today.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Natasha Feroze, and today I'm joined by Brianna Wu, who is the Executive Director at Rebellion PAC, a software engineer, a commentator on trans issues, and once stood for the Democrats in the primaries in 2018. Brianna, thanks for joining us on Spectator TV.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I've been watching some of your interviews recently, and obviously you have always spoken in favor of being a Democrat. I've just spent some time in New York, and I've been speaking to lots of Democrats there now. What is it like being a Democrat in the first few weeks, months of Trump 2.0?
It is like being in Japan right after World War II, where your side has lost and half the people you're talking to don't understand you've lost the war and you need to do something different. It's fairly frustrating, I feel very, very strongly that Democrats have been pursuing a playbook, one that I helped pioneer, one that really leans in on giving women and minorities a fairer shake. I think 10 years into that playbook, we can see very clearly it's not leading to better policy. It's not leading to electoral wins. And it's very obvious to me we need to find a new way forward. And it's really frustrating that so many people in the party are so eager to attack Trump when we keep trying to do that and it's not winning us elections. So I'm trying to convince everyone around me that, yes, Trump is doing some terrible things, but our top priority has got to be fixing our party. It is fundamentally broken.
I was surprised to see, even with all these executive orders, these are some of the things that he was doing couldn't be fathomed in his first presidency. And there hasn't been much resistance. A friend of mine said who's a Democrat, said, frankly, she's just exhausted. But the Democrats know how to get onto the streets and protest. And I understand what you mean about fixing the party, but where is the resistance, do you think?
I think it's a really good question. I think Democrats are demoralized. We're exhausted. I also think, frankly, we're leaderless right now. One of the consequences of Biden, and look, I'm just going to speak really frankly here. I love my party. I am a Democrat. But Biden was so senile, he barely appeared on television for 4 years. We were a party without any message. We were a party without any policy direction other than some vagaries. And I think in the aftermath, we're looking at the Biden presidency very honestly and seeing how we were promised a lot of things, but there was not any political capital put into achieving any of them. So one of the consequences of us having a remarkably weak leader for 4 years is, where is this strength coming from? Right now, the strongest person in our party is probably Gavin Newsom. And if you think a California Democrat is coming to the rescue to lead our party into a new chapter, like, you're just crazy. So I think, unfortunately, we're in a position where we're dealing with the choices we've made, which is to put our fingers in our ears, pretend Biden was a competent, very capable president, when the reality was he was a senile old man. And it hurts me to say, because I think he was a good president, but it's still the truth.
Are you what one might call a never Trumper?
No, I don't think I would be. We tried that in 2016. And, I think about where our party is today, and it's weaker than ever. I think the American people are just tired of us screaming all the time. And frankly, Trump is putting some policies into action that I agree with. He's standing with Israel, for instance, in a way that Biden was just simply unwilling to. I very strongly support that policy. So the way I feel is, when Trump is doing good things, I, as a Democratic operative, am going to praise him for that publicly. I'll give him credit for the good things he does, because that way, when he does really bad things, we will have credibility in speaking up and fighting back.
Yeah, as a journalist, it seems impossible that any opposition can credit another opposition these days, which has always seemed like an obvious thing to me.
I mean, can I just ask you as a journalist, like, it's got to be obvious to you that something's got to change in American politics. We've tried hating each other with everything that we've got for every single year I've been alive. Like, I remember when Newt Gingrich in the contract with America, what was that, 1994? And I remember thinking politics could never be more caustic than that with the government shutdown. And it's just gotten worse every single year I've been alive. And I think at some point, if there is a future for the Democratic Party and a future with America on the world stage, we're going to have to get some adults in charge that can talk to the other side and figure out some things with national security, tax policy, investing in infrastructure. Like, clearly just opposing the other side automatically is not good for America. So I think, like, maybe I'm being naive, but I think a lot of Republicans are tired of this too. And I think maybe we can finally build something together.
You stood in the primaries in 2018, was it?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
do you think you would have been the type of politician that could tap into the other side, or is this something like a conclusion that you've come to now that you've seen the election result this year?
I think anyone following my career can tell my politics have changed very dramatically. And, sometimes people accuse me of like being disingenuous with that. And it's like, no, I've had a front row seat to the dysfunction and dishonesty of the progressive movement for 10 years now. For 10 years now. I literally just a couple of weeks ago was in a meeting where we broke out into a screaming match, not me, but some of the people in the meeting, because someone said, "You guys," accidentally, and that gendered someone in the audience. And it's stupid. It's childish. And for whatever reason, this progressive playbook, it is correct in thinking that we need structural reform with our policies that are focused on the working class. The reality of that playbook, though, is fragmenting us and causing us to obsess about identity in ways that make it impossible for us to move forward as Americans together. And yeah, I'm fairly radically turned against that now. So, in some ways, it's probably better for the country that I lost back then.
Do you still have any ambitions to go into politics, or do you wish you had been elected, or do you look back on it and think I dodged a bullet there?
No, so you can probably hear it in my voice right now. I'm fairly hoarse. I am dealing with a congenital voice issue where I can only speak for a few hours a day. So, as much as I want to help my country in this moment, like, you can't run for office if you can only speak for 3 or 4 hours a day. And I've just had to accept that there are other ways to serve my country. One of the ways I do it is fundraising strategy, getting resources in back channel, helping on legislation. There's plenty of things I can do other than being an elected official.
On the policy topic and politics, I know that you have been an advocate for trans healthcare. I wanted to ask you about how, when you transitioned, how far the science and research has changed in trans healthcare, and how your transition could have been different, just, in terms of the operation, or feel free to expand as you wish, had you had your operation in 2025?
Oh my God. I thank God every day that I transitioned 20 years ago, because the system I transitioned under has nothing to do with the lunatic fringe politics that have hijacked the trans movement today. I think anyone looking at the trans community can see we are more neurotic and more miserable and more unhealthy than we have ever been. And the reason for that is this fringe, insane, progressive nut job class has taken over what used to be a medical issue that affected a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of young boys. And they have expanded it and changed the definitions of it, where literally every bored teenage girl in America is convincing herself she's non-binary, is considering shooting herself up with testosterone. I'm telling you, as someone that has looked at the science as closely as I can in good faith, these policies that they are pushing are completely untethered from anything we can scientifically justify. It is hurting people. It is turning everyone against the trans movement, and we have got to stop. trans healthcare and trans rights have got to be based in science and reality and not some fringe progressive agenda that teaches a generation of people that gender is completely unmoored to sex and you can opt in or opt out of it at will with no medicalization. It is truly insanity. And I am horrified by what this has become.
And obviously, a lot of people now are detransitioning as well. I've read a couple of stories of people who had puberty blockers as children, have decided that the transition wasn't right for them, are detransitioning and now suing their parents for making these decisions on their behalf when they felt like it wasn't for them. How difficult do you find it to navigate that parental decision over what could be a suicidal feeling for a child, and actually giving the child the ability to grow out of what could be a phase?
Sure. So it's very complicated, but the baseline is parents have not been told the truth. Politics have hijacked trans healthcare, and parents are not being told the truth. They're being told if they affirm their children, that if they don't affirm their children, they're going to commit suicide. That's not true. And, the reality is, like, even as someone who medically transitioned, who is extremely happy with my transition, I cannot imagine life any other way. If I had a child tomorrow and they were a natal female telling me they wanted to transition, I would force them to wait until they were 18 before I gave them testosterone. The rates of detransition for natal girls is through the roof. We don't know why, but just for whatever reason, boys that want to be girls don't regret this at anywhere near the rates. And the other part of this is testosterone works just as well for them if you give it to them at 15 versus 25. So what is the rush? It's insane to me. There's no reason a natal female should be going and getting a double mastectomy at 14 years old. We're over-medicalizing these kids. And I want to be clear, there are some cases, some really, really rare cases of boys that want to be girls where it is in their favor to get them time or to intervene because testosterone could be so destructive to your ability to live an integrated life. But that's not what we're doing. Do you understand? We are taking people that literally don't even want to be women. They just want to be something in between or have softer skin, and we're giving them hormones. It is insane to me. There's no study I can point to justify this. The entire system is broken. It needs to be rebuilt today.
I don't know if you're familiar with, we had a psychiatrist on Spectator TV called Az Hakim. He believed in group therapy for kids with gender dysphoria.
Sure.
Because he believed what part of the problem was, if you put a child in a room and you quiz them about what their issues are, they internalize a lot of problems and it almost manifests in itself. Whereas if you put them in a group, they might feel as if they can see all the different variations of people struggling with their gender, with their identity, and actually they're not alone. And I think he said that at sort of 8 or 9 out of 10 left not wanting to transition or anything like that. Do you think that could have been, like, are there other ways of helping children that are just completely unexplored?
I mean, I think that's fairly obvious, right? There's an assumption built into this version of the trans movement that everyone needs to be medically affirmed, which is just plainly insanity. My message to anyone is the healthcare I got by any measure was extreme. If you can find ways to live your life without it, do that. Like, it's really serious. The things that I went through permanently changed my body. I'm going to have to take estrogen for the rest of my life. I am weaker. I cannot run as fast. And, it was a challenge socially to integrate. I did all those things. I've been very happily married to a man for 17 years, but this is not a path for everyone. So I think we've got to get over this fear, which is the only way the activists seem to be able to message this, where every single person we don't automatically affirm or give another path is a tragedy somehow. It's clearly the opposite. We are over-medicalizing this. And just the last thing I'm going to say about this, where have the transvestites gone? Because when I transitioned 20 years ago, there were two groups of people. There were the transsexuals, people like me that wanted to be women, and there were natal males with a fetish for wearing women's clothes that did not want to transition. I think people don't understand. This has been rolled into the trans umbrella. Some studies show this is like 3% of men. And you can look at textbooks from the 60s, and they will say that like giving transvestites hormones does not serve them. And of course it doesn't serve them. It like will dull the sexual desire that drives their behavior. They don't act like women when you get them on this stuff. So the problem is the politics are going ahead of the healthcare. I want every single person that is looking for help with gender dysphoria to get a treatment that is going to work for them. And we need to stop being so afraid of this answer not looking exactly like people like me.
But how do you find the balance between, and even just you, if you must have a lot of kids or young people that are influenced by you, and they come up to you and they say, Brianna, I want to change sex. How do you find the balance between celebrating, championing who you are and how much it's radically changed your life for the better, but then also accepting that it might not be the right life for them, and it is extremely it can be very difficult, very painful, and dangerous.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would do is be honest with those children and say, you can't change your sex. Like, I am a natal male. I always will be. When I go through life, people treat me as a woman. I look like a woman. I act like that. But I have to be honest about what I am. I'm somebody that got healthcare and it changed how people perceive me. So we need to be honest about the treatments that we're giving them for starters. I think the other is people like to act like this is really complicated. And the truth is we actually know a lot about these different categories of people. If someone comes to me and they go, I've got a child that's 5 years old, they're a natal boy, they're saying they want to be a girl, I know some things. I know that there's a 90% chance if you leave that kid alone, they're just going to grow up and be gay, and a 10% chance they're going to end up like me. If that same parent comes to me and says, my child started having onset of this when they were in like 7th grade, I understand that's a different type of transsexual. They're probably going to grow up attracted to women or other trans girls, and they're going to be on a different trajectory. They're probably not going to get married to a man. So the reality is we actually do know a lot about this. It doesn't mean you shove people into categories, but we're so afraid to unpack the complexity. Just one more example, autism is through the roof right now with trans people. I didn't know one person with autism when I transitioned 20 years ago. Nowadays, it's easily a third to half of the community. And people with autism just transition for different psychological reasons. They have more trouble integrating as women. They do it for different reasons. Like, why not have an honest conversation about all of this if it's healthcare? It just blows my mind.
Going on to the trans community and adults, and forgive my ignorance here, but
Sure.
would what you call you said earlier, where are the transvestites? Would they typically now be deemed to be people who have autogynephilia, and then the transsexuals are the ones that have gender dysphoria? Is that how you might categorize them?
No, boy, if you want to get into typology, like there are some transsexuals that have autogynephilia and they transition and the feelings abate and they end up as normal women, right? I think there's a misnomer out there that autogynephilia equals the bad kind, and homosexual, transsexual equals the good kind. But it is true that a lot of transvestites like do have autogynephilic fantasies, sexual fantasies of being a woman. So this is where healthcare really, really matters. I think every single one of those people deserves the right to sit down with a therapist that truly understands that typology, that can walk them through it and can help them find something that's going to work for them. Because what ends up happening is if you get those transvestites, those men with low body dysmorphia that do have these sexual fantasies, and you pump them full of anti-androgens, which kills their sexual desire, and put them on estrogen, they don't do well. They aren't women, so they don't act like women after you do that, and they don't integrate as women. So you're just not getting them what they need.
For our audience that don't know, also, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but someone who has
Sure.
autogynephilia is where being a woman and a transition to a woman is a fetish, is a sexual fantasy. Should they be treated, when it comes to making policies, should they be categorized differently as a trans person? And do you find that you're often fighting on behalf of that category that people worry about more? And I'm talking about so-called TERFs here. I think a lot of them would
Sure.
be are the ones that often say like some trans people are pervs and it's a fetish, and is it that differentiation between someone who's transitioned as has autogynephilia and someone that isn't, and it's gender dysphoria, that is where you can become not you specifically, but one can become unstuck?
Well, see, so the typology is it's applying sexology to transitioning, right? It's a helpful lens. I think that one of the things is this typology has become so politicized that people just use this to mean like good type and bad type. So it's like if you put a gun to my head, like, look, I'm obsessed with Sophia Spectator, right? Like I love her. I can sing Murder on the Dance Floor all day long. I'm more HSTS than anything else, like by far. But at the same time, it's like that's not why I transitioned. I transitioned because of my identity and because of who I wanted to be. And the typology really leaves all that on the floor. So I think that what is more helpful is we need to train therapists to understand these sexology concepts to help patients get health care. I don't think it makes sense to say, like, this is a good type, this is a bad type of transsexual. And there's also like a misnomer that HSTS transsexuals, homosexual transsexuals, are like we can be some fairly embarrassing women just because we tend to act like drag queens sometimes. So it's very hard to integrate in some ways. So there's no easy way to be trans, basically.
Difficult question for you, Brianna. I want to ask you about JK Rowling. She's someone we've spoken about a lot of times on Spectator TV. And one of our writers, Debbie Hayton, who is a trans woman, once wrote that Debbie believes JK Rowling has taken the TERF movement too far and has become quite malicious. It's something we've debated a lot, and I wanted to get your view because I know that you've written that you think that JK Rowling is a transphobe. Could you expand on that a bit?
I think it's complicated because I think this version of the trans community, people need to understand. I look up Brianna Wu and look up Gamergate. So 10 years ago, I was one of the people that like started this culture war with gamers sending me death threats, rape threats, threatening to murder me, threatening to murder my husband, my dogs. Like it was a real hell of a time. So it's very painful to me to look at trans activists because I have to admit that trans activists have treated JK Rowling the exact same way that Gamergate treated me. Anyone can look at her mentions and see just virulent sexism. They can see rape threats. They can see death threats. They can see dehumanization. They can see moralizing and an unwillingness to engage in any of her points. So I want to be clear. I understand why she's angry. I am furious at the way trans people have treated JK Rowling. At the same point, she has been radicalized. And I think she's really moved to a point where she is so degrading in ways that she does not understand. I don't feel personally like she's looking for solutions anymore. I think she's looking to take out her anger on a population. And what I really feel here is we have two sides that have become radicalized. I think you've got the trans fringe over here They've insisted on some politics. They're completely unmoored from science. And I think you've got this turf project over here, this gender critical project that truly believes in pushing us out of public life. And the answer is in the middle, obviously. We've got to rethink the policy about which natal males are getting access to medical transition and going into women's spaces, right? In America, all too often there's stories about women having to see penises in locker rooms. I don't want that. That horrifies me. That's awful public policy. So the question is, where can the sane, normal people come in the middle here and have a real discussion? How do we balance women's rights and trans women's rights and give dignity to everyone? It's obvious to me there are policy compromises we can make, and it breaks my heart that JK Rowling is not part of that solution. She's welcome to reach out to me anytime. I would love to have a conversation.
Do you think, obviously, with so-called TERFs, a lot of them are in the lesbian community.
Sure.
And can you see that they've obviously suffered their own form of prejudice? So is it quite interesting to you that they then are, by the trans community, who often call them prejudice?
I think that the way trans women have treated lesbian and women's spaces is deeply embarrassing. It makes me angry, to be honest with you. When I transitioned 20 years ago, I'm not into women, so I've never even been to a lesbian bar. But, the trans people I knew that were into women understood there was a tremendous amount of caution and respect and buy-in that you needed to have to go into those spaces. And that is just gone today. I see stories all the time about trans women that don't look like women in any way, shape, or form on these lesbian dating apps, asking people to do things to their genitals. It is disgusting. And, I don't blame lesbians for being so traumatized by us because we are acting like entitled men in the way that we are approaching this relationship. I don't know how to fix it other than humility and to admit that we've broken the social contract and to try to reset things. So if any lesbians are looking at this, I'm sorry. It's embarrassing the way that my community has behaved. This is what happens when you don't bother socializing an entire generation of trans women. I'm sorry.
I suppose what a TERF would say back to you is on this topic of compromise, where it becomes impossible is that as soon as you have a situation where a trans person wants to enter a space that is not what their biological sex is, you're breaking a boundary that has been created. And then how do you have rules? At what point, when you have a compromise, at what point do boundaries constantly get broken? We actually, as we speak, there's a tribunal in going on because a doctor, a trans,
I saw that story.
doctor, was getting changed in a woman's changing room, and the nurse complained about it, and so the trans doctor has filed a formal complaint, and now it's going through a tribunal. And I suppose, how would you, one thing that all these Twitter spats often go back to this idea of compromise. And I think for the thing that might puzzle lots of people is, how can you have a compromise when you don't have a clear set of boundaries? Because you're just constantly going to be dealing with these grey areas, which is exactly what this tribunal is doing.
Yeah, I think it's really complicated. I can tell you, for me, I've had vaginoplasty. I think I pass reasonably well, but when I go to the gym, I shower at home just because if someone can tell I'm trans, I don't want to upset them. I think that, I think women deserve the right to say, no, we don't feel comfortable with you in our space. But I also think trans women deserve to have health care and a right to employment and a life. And, if I were on that tribunal, I actually don't think it's that big a deal to ask someone that's a doctor to get changed in a private room, right? I really don't think that's a big deal. I think the social contract is all of us trying to get along with each other as best as we can. So I would say to my sisters out there, I understand that it can be dehumanizing the way that we're treated sometimes. The way that TERFs talk to us is just, it's brutal. It is cruel. It is so mean, but we will get so much further with getting goodwill from the public, with humility and grace, and trying to get people to buy in and for them to see our humanity, than we will by forcing them to with the force of law to allow us to do things. And I would also say, like, don't discount just how much better this has gotten in my lifetime. Like, I think people do not appreciate just how much better it is to be trans today than it was 20 years ago. The surgery to feminize you is through the roof better. The public awareness is better. Just top to bottom, we have so many advantages that we didn't used to have. So I would just beg people to just try to have some patience with people.
Do you worry about the money going into trans healthcare? Because lots of people talk about big pharma. As soon as something becomes profitable, there's so much money in this. It's not really talked about enough how responsible private doctors are for encouraging people to have gender affirming surgery.
Well, I think it's two ways. Like, the cost to my insurance company of me being trans is like $10 a month. I take estrogen and that's it. No one paid for a dime of any of my health care except for me. But at the same time, I think if being trans is healthcare, and I believe it is, and not something you self-ID into, I think there's a role for these clinics to take care of it. Where I would really draw a line, and where I think it's gone too far, and to be clear, I'm speaking more about United States healthcare policy.
Sure.
I don't understand the ins and outs of the NHS as well. But I know for a fact here in Massachusetts, what we've done is dismantled the gatekeeping, the medical safeguarding that I had to go through to certify myself as being transsexual. And if you'll just bear with me, I think this will really help your viewers understand this. So when I wanted to go on hormones 20 years ago, I first had to go to a therapist extensively for at least 3 months and talk to them and meet a clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria. These were the old school standards, which were much higher than they were today. So then I had to take that letter written by a clinician to a doctor. That doctor had to look into the clinician, make sure they were legit, ask me questions, make sure I was representing myself honestly. Then they did a bunch of blood work to make sure that it was safe for me to go on hormones. And then slowly we started doing it with ramping up the dosage. Then I had to go live and work for a full year as a woman. This had to be documented. I couldn't stay home and stay on the computer. I had to go out there and socialize, make friends as a woman, get employed as a woman, start dating men, all those things.
What was that like?
Yeah, I had to. It was great. I loved it. I took to it like a fish to water, but it also forced me to socialize. Right? There are rules to being a woman that you won't learn if you're sitting in your apartment online.
Yeah.
And then finally, at the end of that, I had to go get an additional 2 letters. One of them from a literal psychologist, which was very expensive, who did an extensive case history on me, arguing to a surgeon why I should be qualified to get vaginoplasty. And then I took it to that doctor to get it. This was a long years process of going through this that made sure I was transsexual, made sure I really had gender dysphoria, and helped socialize me as a woman. This is my point with your question. Today, all of those systems are gone thanks to trans activists. They're gone. I could take you literally today to Planned Parenthood in Massachusetts and get you on testosterone this afternoon if you wanted to.
Yeah.
You could start becoming a boy today.
Yeah.
No background, no therapy, just signing a letter saying you understand the consequences. This is insane. And because the standards are so much lower today, your ability to get surgery, we're funneling people into getting surgery that's not going to serve in the long run. So I understand your complaint about the cost, but it's not the access to this. It's the lack of safeguarding to make sure the right people are getting that care, if that makes sense to you.
Lastly, Brianna, I just want to ask you about gaming, which is a topic I know less about than most people. Is gaming something that parents should be worried about for their kids?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got studies that show that spending too much time in online games, it doesn't permanently stop your social development, but it does slow it down. It can lower your empathy in some cases. There are also situations like children with autism. If you put them in Minecraft servers with other children with autism, it can be a remarkably positive social experience. So I think, like everything else, it's if it's excessive, you need to look at that. But certainly, I think parents need to play a role in what their kids are playing today. It is fairly terrifying. It will never stop shocking me that I can boot up the Nintendo Switch today
Yeah.
and see all these extremely sexy, inappropriate games for adults with a lot of extremely suggestive sexual themes. And that's just offered to every 8-year-old out there.
Yeah.
It just seems insane to me.
Yeah.
But, I don't run those servers.
What happened to the days of Donkey Kong? I know you were
Well, I still like Donkey
you
Kong.
liked
So
Peach, Princess Peach. You're a big fan.
I am the number 2 Princess Peach speedrunner in the entire world. So
Who's number one?
it's a guy that I've been trying to beat for a long time. I've got this pesky job that gets in the way. So
Amazing. Brianna Wu, thank you so much for joining us on Spectator TV.
I really appreciate it. And I hope your viewers, I really tried to be open and honest here today. I think people can see I'm really struggling to get the right policy. I think it starts with admitting some uncomfortable truths. And I think if we keep doing that, we can get to the right policy. So I really appreciate the opportunity.